Okay, so think about it for a second. The air is thick with the scent of pine and cinnamon.
Hmm.
Twinkling lights are draped on, every single street corner. You can hear that inescapable, familiar chorus of carols pretty much everywhere you go.
You really can't escape it.
You can't. And this whole sensory experience, this feeling of deep-seated, comforting tradition, it makes modern Christmas feel truly timeless, doesn't it? Like it's been exactly this way forever.
It absolutely feels fixed. It feels like this singular, predictable ritual
Yeah,
that we all just, adhere to every single year.
right.
But as part of the Urban Herald team, we've taken a really deep dive into the evolution of this celebration. And what we found is that Christmas is, well, it's anything but static.
Hmm.
Its history is chaotic, it's political, and frankly, it's a far more complex story than just a simple annual religious feast.
And that's really the core of our mission today. We wanted to provide a real shortcut to being well-informed about the history of the holiday. We've tracked the origins of Christmas from ancient pagan festivals through these incredibly specific Christian theological calculations.
Which is a fascinating story in itself.
It is, and then straight into periods of profound political conflict. Who knew a holiday could cause nationwide riots?
It's kind of amazing.
All the way to its complete reinvention by the Victorians, and then finally its intense modern commercialization.
What's so fascinating to me is the sheer resilience of these midwinter celebrations. Our thesis really is that Christmas is less a single tradition and more of a rich tapestry woven over 2 millennia.
That's a great way to put it.
The core human need for light, for feasting, for community, and for a promise of renewal, those themes, they consistently resurface regardless of the official reason for the celebration, and I think that is why it endures.
Okay, so let's unpack this entire history. Our mission here is to trace how a relatively minor feast day, a date that, isn't even specified in the Bible, transformed into this singular global cultural and economic phenomenon that just completely dominates our calendars today. Let's start at the very beginning. Long before Bethlehem, December was already a major time for celebration.
Exactly. To really understand Christmas, you have to acknowledge that midwinter was already a crucial, dangerous, but also very celebratory time all across the Northern Hemisphere. Civilizations shared these common needs during the winter solstice. There was this desperate hope for the triumph of light over the relentless darkness.
Right, because the days are getting shorter and shorter.
They're getting shorter, it's cold, it's dark. And you also had to establish essential communal feasting before the deep winter scarcity really set in. And of course, you're celebrating the promise of spring's eventual return.
And when you look at the source material for this deep dive, the most influential predecessor to modern Christmas has to be the Roman festival of Saturnalia.
Well, absolutely.
And we are talking about a party that was less of a solemn religious observance and more like an annual sanctioning of unbridled merriment.
Unbridled is the perfect word. It was a week of profound social inversion.
Yeah.
So Saturnalia honored Saturn, who was the god of agriculture and the harvest, and it marked the end of the agricultural year. It originally started on December 17th, but it proved so incredibly popular that it just kept expanding. It expanded to an entire week, and often it would overlap completely with the winter solstice.
And this social inversion you mentioned, that's the key concept, right? Because it echoes through all of subsequent history, the idea that normal societal rules were just completely suspended.
Completely thrown out the window. It meant chaos.
So what did that look like?
Well, for one, slaves enjoyed temporary freedom. They were actually permitted to insult their owners without any consequence.
No way.
Yes, and masters were actually expected to serve their servants dinner. Gambling, which was usually strictly prohibited outside of this 1 week, was suddenly allowed everywhere. It just led to days of intense, often drunken revelry.
The whole atmosphere must have just been electric. It's like this officially sanctioned misrule.
It was a necessary pressure valve, for a very rigid, highly stratified society.
That makes sense.
The traditional greeting throughout Rome was Io Saturnalia, so you can just imagine that energy. And some of the specific customs included these elaborate public and private feasts and widespread gift-giving. Often this involved small terracotta or wax figures. They were called sigillaria.
So those little sigillaria, they were basically the Roman version of Christmas stocking stuffers, something you give to friends and family.
That's a perfect analogy.
So this really established the foundational template for later on. The intense feasting, the explicit permission for giving gifts, and the suspension of the usual rigid social rules.
Precisely. These are the unmistakable parallels that allowed later Christian celebrations to feel immediately familiar to the population they were trying to convert, The church didn't have to invent the desire for a December feast. They just had to, relabel it.
But Saturnalia wasn't the only midwinter celebration that was dictating the calendar. The 25th of December itself was already a really significant date on the Roman calendar.
It was. And that's because of the celebration of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti,
Which translates to what?
the birthday of the unconquered sun. This festival honored the solar deity, the sun god. It was formally established by Emperor Aurelian back in 274 CE.
Okay, so what's the context there? Why did he establish it?
Well, what's important here is that Aurelian established this during a period of really intense political and military instability. He was trying to create a unifying state cult around the sun god, who was incredibly popular with the soldiers and across both the eastern and western provinces.
So it was a religious observance, but it was also a political tool for unity.
Exactly. And symbolically, it marked the winter solstice according to the Julian calendar. It was meant to signal the sun god's inevitable victory over the winter darkness.
And that symbolic significance, light conquering darkness, that must have been deeply resonant for early Christians.
Oh, absolutely. Light is a central metaphor for Christ himself. So that overlap created this incredibly powerful metaphorical link that church leaders would definitely utilize later when they were placing their own celebration.
Okay, so let's move north, far away from Rome's immediate influence. We find similar themes, but they're adapted for a much harsher environment, right?
Sure.
In the Yule traditions of Germanic and Norse peoples.
In a much, much harsher environment. Midwinter in Scandinavia and Germania was terrifying. Food scarcity was acute. The threat of hunger and cold was absolutely constant. So they celebrated Yule, a period that they believed lasted for about 12 days, during which the sun literally stood still.
And to encourage its return, what did they do?
They kindled massive fires. This was a literal fight against the cold and the darkness, a magical and a practical act rolled into one.
And so many of the customs that feel central to our modern holiday, they originate directly from this, right? Like bringing evergreen boughs indoors.
Yes, that symbolized life persisting through the death of winter. It offered this splash of color against what was otherwise an endless gray landscape.
And the Yule log?
Crucially, they practiced the burning of the Yule log. This was a hugely significant ritual. It often involved an entire tree trunk that was lit on what we'd call Christmas Eve, and it was expected to burn for 12 days straight.
And what was the purpose of that?
It was a practice intended to cleanse the previous year's misfortune and to welcome the eventual return of spring and the agricultural cycle.
And of course, the feasting.
Oh, yeah. This was the time for consumption. You had to use the meat that had been slaughtered or preserved before the deepest winter set in. It was also a time for making offerings to the gods and to your ancestors.
So these northern customs, the evergreens, the fire, the communal feasting, and that profound theme of light versus darkness, they all significantly influenced how Christmas celebrations developed over the next several centuries as Christianity expanded.
Without a doubt.
So we've established that December was already this really festival-rich month, but the central historical puzzle is still there. The Christian Gospels, they meticulously describe Christ's birth, but they conspicuously omit any mention of the specific date.
Not a word.
So why December 25th?
It's the essential question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the answer is so much more nuanced than that simple soundbite you always hear, which is, oh, the church just stole the pagan holiday.
Right.
Our research shows the truth really combines some sophisticated theological calculation with, later on, a lot of cultural adaptation.
Okay, let's start with the calculation, because I think this part often surprises people.
It really does. This wasn't just a random selection. It was the result of highly detailed calendrical work by early Christian scholars. They were operating under this ancient belief that great prophets, especially Christ, were conceived and died on the exact same calendar date.
And the key player here is who?
A man named Sextus Julius Africanus, writing around the year 221 CE. He performed this incredibly sophisticated calculation to pinpoint the date of Christ's conception.
And he settled on March 25th.
He did, March 25th, which is traditionally associated with the spring equinox, a very symbolic date.
So if the conception happened on March 25th, you count forward 9 months, the standard period of human gestation.
And you land precisely on December 25th for the birth.
Wow.
This theory was absolutely crucial because it established the date based purely on internal Christian doctrine, on symmetry and chronology,
Right.
rather than basing it explicitly on external pagan festivals.
And this calculation gained traction surprisingly early. I think the earliest documented mention of December 25th as the accepted birthday appears in a mid-4th century Roman almanac, right,
But
from 336 CE.
that's right, it just stated, Natus Christus in Bethlehem, Judea. Christ is born in Bethlehem of Judea.
And by the late 4th century, major church figures like John Chrysostom and Augustine of Hippo were already attesting to December 25th as the established official date.
Which then brings us to the more pragmatic explanation, the cultural adaptation part. Because even if the calculation was genuine, the proximity to Saturnalia and Sol Invictus provided this undeniable strategic advantage.
Because by the 4th century, Christianity was transitioning. It was going from this persecuted minority to the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine.
Right, so church leaders were facing the reality of operating in an empire where these pagan traditions were just deeply, deeply ingrained, especially in December.
It was pragmatic wisdom then, maybe even a brilliant cultural strategy to place a major Christian feast during a time when the population was already used to large-scale licensed celebration.
It gave them a huge evangelistic advantage. Instead of trying to eliminate popular customs, they could adapt the existing patterns of celebration and reinfuse them with Christian meaning. They were effectively Christianizing time itself.
Now, here's a critical historical nugget that I think really addresses that theft argument. While a lot of modern sources claim the church deliberately replaced the pagan festivals, our sources show the documentation supporting that idea, the idea of a concerted replacement strategy. It didn't actually appear until the 12th century.
Exactly. That's centuries after the fact.
So we have to ask, why did that replacement argument suddenly emerge 700 or 800 years after the date was already established?
Well, by the 12th century, the context had completely changed.
Yeah.
The papacy was gaining immense authority. There was a flourishing of scholastic inquiry and historical documentation. And so scholars started looking back at the origins of practices, and they wanted to create these clean, defined theological histories.
So, the 12th century scholars, they were trying to create this ordered and pure history for the church. They retroactively argued that the date was a deliberate choice to extinguish paganism, which then helped justify the church's dominance at that time.
The original evidence points much more toward a genuine calculation first.
So the scholarly synthesis, which is crucial for you, our listener, to understand, is that it's not an either-or situation.
Not at all. It was both. Genuine, sophisticated Christian calculations fortuitously landed on a date that already hosted major pagan celebrations. And this coincidence provided church leaders with an undeniable cultural and evangelistic opportunity. It ensured that many of these ancient traditions like feasting and gift-giving survived, just reinterpreted into the Christian era.
Okay, so once that date was established and accepted, Christmas just explodes in the Middle Ages.
It really does.
It stops being a single day, and it becomes this extended season of extraordinary celebration, characterized by a fascinating mix of, deep religious devotion and often just outright social chaos.
The formalization of the season started pretty early with the 12 Days of Christmas. This was officially established by the Council of Tours way back in 567 CE.
And that stretched from December 25th all the way through January 6th.
January 6th, which marks Epiphany, the celebration of the Magi arriving to present their gifts to the infant Jesus.
And beyond linking the Nativity to the Epiphany, this extended holiday might have had a pragmatic administrative function, right?
It's very likely. The Western Church was still relying on the Julian or solar calendar, while a lot of Eastern territories were using other methods, sometimes based on lunar cycles.
Which created a discrepancy.
About a 12-day discrepancy.
Which was conveniently transformed into a sanctioned, empire-wide holiday period.
And within those 12 days, each day carried its own importance. You had St. Stephen's Day on December 26th, the Feast of the Holy Innocents on the 28th, New Year's.
It was a packed calendar. And you have to remember, medieval life was incredibly rigid. It was dominated by the church and the feudal hierarchy. This season was pretty much the one time that society could truly invert itself. And the centerpiece of this inversion was the Lord of Misrule.
Ah, yes.
This is the custom that connects most directly back to the Saturnalicious princeps of ancient Rome, the mock king.
It's a direct descendant. A peasant, a servant, or sometimes a minor cleric was temporarily granted mock authority. He became the master of ceremonies for the entire season's revelry.
That seems like a brilliant, if maybe a little risky, social invention.
Oh, very risky.
Yeah.
His job was to orchestrate controlled chaos masks, games, processions, and he would often mock the very authority that appointed him.
So this was a time when normal social hierarchies were playfully and maybe sometimes dangerously suspended. Servants could boss their masters, students their professors.
Exactly. The idea was to allow the disenfranchised to blow off steam through a kind of ritualized satire. This period of licensed misrule could last anywhere from 12 days up to 3 whole months in some noble households or at court.
A 3-month party.
Imagine. It was a crucial safety valve for that highly structured medieval society. It was designed to prevent real class tension from boiling over into actual rebellion.
And even royalty sanctioned it. Henry VII and Henry VIII appointed and paid substantial sums to their lords of misrule at court to organize lavish entertainment.
We have the court records detailing all the expenses, costumes, props, all the feasting. It shows how integral this controlled social chaos was to the stability of the state itself. The custom did wane after Edward VI's reign, but its spirit just permeated the entire season for centuries.
Now let's talk about the consumption. Medieval Christmas was really defined by these stark extremes.
Lord.
People observed a strict month-long Advent fast leading up to December 25th, and then that was followed by an explosion of devotion, attending midnight mass and dawn services, and then just sheer intense feasting.
The medieval table truly showcased abundance against scarcity. Because preserving meat through the winter was so difficult and required so much salt, Christmas was the ideal time to slaughter animals and consume fresh food.
And we're not just talking about a roast chicken. We're talking massive quantities of roasted meats, often including these showpiece dishes like a boar's head.
And incredibly exotic items. For the elite, at least, like roast swans, peacocks, or even roast porpoise.
Roast porpoise!
I know. And it wasn't just meat. There were complex pies, early versions of puddings, studded with dried fruit and spices, and just seemingly endless barrels of ale and wine.
That anecdote about Henry V is just astounding. He famously hosted a feast that featured 40 different types of fish.
40. Just navigating the complex fast and feast rules of the time, but with tremendous luxury.
And this abundance wasn't just for the elite, though.
No. Feasting, charity, and giving to the poor were theological imperatives. For the common person, Christmas represented this vital opportunity for celebration and necessary indulgence that contrasted so sharply with the surrounding winter scarcity. It really cemented the holiday as an irreplaceable, highly anticipated part of the yearly calendar.
The deep cultural integration of Christmas is what made the next chapter, the Puritan assault, one of the most revealing periods in the holiday's entire history. Here, we see this profound clash between religious zeal and popular tradition that literally boiled over into political revolution.
The zealous Protestants, who we know as the Puritans, viewed the holiday with absolute hostility, and their objections were rooted in these deeply held, principled theological beliefs.
Okay, so what was their first major objection?
First and foremost, Christmas was a Catholic remnant. They were trying to purify the Church of England, and they saw Christmas, with its elaborate feasting, its ceremonial masses, its social license, as hopelessly tainted by the corrupted Church of Rome, which they just despised.
Secondly, they were morally outraged by the behavior itself.
Oh, completely. The boisterous nature, the extensive drinking, the gambling, and all this social disorder that was epitomized by the Lord of Misrule, it was all just incompatible with what they defined as austere, godly living.
They wanted solemnity, Bible reading, fasting.
Not revelry and theatrical inversions.
But their most foundational argument, and this is really key, was that Christmas lacked any biblical justification.
That's the bedrock of their argument. Since the Bible neither commanded nor specified a date for Christ's birth, the holiday was viewed as a human invention, a popish tradition, just masquerading as a divine ordinance.
And the Puritans were really consistent in this belief. They weren't just picking on Christmas, were they?
Not at all. They wanted to eliminate Easter and all the saints' days, too. And they had a precedent. Scotland, which was already dominated by the Presbyterian Kirk, had abolished Christmas decades earlier, back in the 1560s.
So when the Puritans gained political power in England in the 1640s, they acted immediately.
The restrictions began very quickly. In 1644, Christmas Day happened to coincide with Parliament's mandated monthly fast day.
Oh.
So Parliament, eager to demonstrate its godly authority over the king and the church, ordered the fast be observed with a more solemn humiliation instead of feasting.
So basically the exact opposite of Christmas.
The exact opposite. Then the following year, 1645, they passed the Directory for Public Worship. This was the official replacement for the Book of Common Prayer. It listed all the services and days of observance, and it conspicuously omitted Christmas altogether.
So they just erased it from the calendar.
They effectively banned it by just removing it from the religious calendar.
And the final decisive blow came in 1647 after the Civil War.
Yes. Parliament, now dominated by Cromwell's forces, passed an ordinance that officially declared celebrating Christmas a punishable offense. They didn't just tell people to stay home. They ordered churches to close and, crucially, they mandated that shops and markets had to remain open on December 25th.
So they were trying to force people to treat it just like any other ordinary working day.
Exactly. But this attempt at suppression provoked fierce and immediate popular resistance.
I can imagine.
It became really clear that the ban was an elite Puritan project, while the working class and many traditional Anglicans, they just clung tenaciously to their established traditions.
And pro-Christmas riots erupted across the country in 1647, Canterbury, Norwich, Ipswich, Oxford.
Canterbury was particularly dramatic. The rioters took control of the entire city for several weeks, declaring their refusal to observe the parliamentary ordinance.
And in London, the apprentice boys, who were often the source of popular political action, violently forced shopkeepers to close their businesses on Christmas Day in direct defiance of the law.
It was an open rebellion over a holiday.
And the Puritan government, they must have known they couldn't police every single household.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Sources from the period show that even in parliamentary territories, people simply ignored the prohibition privately. They kept celebrating. They kept referring to Christmas in personal letters and legal records throughout the 1640s and 1650s.
They were essentially treating the ban as this unenforceable interference in their lives.
And this popular backlash really underscores a vital point. Christmas traditions had become so deeply embedded in the social and economic fabric of English culture that it was just impossible to suppress that deeply rooted human need for a midwinter celebration through mere legislation.
So when Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660,
Christmas was instantly and joyfully restored right along with him.
so if the Puritans nearly erased Christmas, the Victorians absolutely resurrected it and then reinvented it in the 19th century.
Completely reinvented it. During Queen Victoria's long reign, the holiday moved decisively away from that medieval misrule and towards the values of family, domesticity, charity, and this very carefully curated middle-class joy.
This Victorian Christmas revival, it created virtually all the aesthetic and the spirit that we recognize today.
It really did. They consciously took these older, scattered traditions and focused them into a single, cohesive celebration that was designed to promote home, hearth, and moral reflection in what was becoming an increasingly industrial and complex world.
And the most famous German import, popularized by the monarchy itself, was the Christmas tree. Now, Queen Charlotte, who was German, had brought decorated evergreens to Windsor in 1800, but the tradition didn't really stick.
Not really, no.
Until her grandson, Prince Albert, reinforced it.
The crucial turning point was the year 1848. The Illustrated London News published this highly influential engraving of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and their children gathered around a magnificent decorated tree at Windsor Castle.
And that engraving was then reprinted in the U.S., right?
It was, very quickly. And this image was revolutionary because it presented this powerful visual endorsement of the tradition by the royal family, who were really seen as the moral compass of the nation.
It showed a total shift in focus, a solemn family gathering focused inward, rather than that rowdy public feasting of the medieval era.
Exactly. And Albert promoted it aggressively, drawing on his German heritage. He personally decorated the trees with lit candles, gingerbread sweets, small toys. He standardized the aesthetic that would define the era.
And he actively sent decorated trees to schools and army barracks around Windsor, right?
He did. He was transforming the Christmas tree from a curiosity into an essential symbol of domestic middle-class bliss.
So Albert gave them the tree, but Charles Dickens gave them the spirit.
Oh, absolutely. The impact of his 1843 novella, A Christmas Carol, truly cannot be overstated in codifying the holiday's moral framework.
Dickens wrote this during the Hungry 40s, which was a time when the Industrial Revolution had created this acute child poverty and immense social inequality.
He was deeply troubled by the social reality of the era. You had the rise of these strict poor laws and just immense hardship for the working class.
And he was motivated by what he witnessed firsthand, wasn't he? Particularly after visiting the Field Lane Ragged School.
That's right. He initially planned to write a political pamphlet, but instead he resolved to strike a sledgehammer blow for the poor through a narrative that would reach the broadest possible audience with real emotional force.
And Scrooge's transformation from this miserly advocate of Malthusian principles, decrease the surplus population,
A truly chilling line.
to a generous, charitable celebrant that created the modern template for how Christmas should be observed.
The book codified the contemporary spirit of Christmas, a time for family reconciliation, public charity, reflection, and this emotional warmth that has to break through the capitalist hustle.
And the book was an immediate sensation. It sold out its first edition in just a few days and has remained continuously in print ever since.
Dickens' narrative reinvigorated older customs, like caroling, which had declined during the Puritan era, and it popularized new ones, cementing the holiday's association with active generosity toward those less fortunate.
And at the same time, the Victorians were pioneering Christmas commercialization, though on a much smaller scale than today.
The beginnings of it.
In that same pivotal year, 1843, Sir Henry Cole commissioned the first commercial Christmas card.
And Cole, who was involved in implementing the uniform penny post, found himself just overwhelmed by the custom of sending these detailed, handwritten Christmas letters.
He needed a time-saving solution, a 19th century life hack.
Exactly. And the card he commissioned, it depicted 3 generations celebrating, and it was alongside these smaller panels showing acts of charity.
So it perfectly captured that dual Victorian emphasis on family and benevolence.
It did. And while it was initially a slow burn because of the high cost, as printing technology improved dramatically in the 1870s and 1880s, exchanging Christmas cards just exploded into a beloved tradition.
The Victorians were really innovation engines for the holiday. They invented Christmas crackers in the 1840s. They established dedicated Christmas shopping. They standardized the festive family dinner with turkey and plum pudding.
And they cultivated that idealized, cozy image of a white Christmas. They fundamentally reshaped the holiday into the version that we're all still in some way trying to replicate today.
So next we have to trace the extraordinary cultural journey of the central gift giver himself, Santa Claus. His evolution from a 4th century Greek bishop renowned for quiet piety to this rotund figure flying a sleigh. It is one of history's most fascinating transformations. It blends religious piety, Dutch folk tradition, and some really intense American marketing.
It all begins with a historical figure. Nicholas, the Bishop of Myra, born around 280 CE in what is now Turkey. He became renowned across the Christian world for his extraordinary generosity and his secret gift-giving, particularly to the poor and vulnerable.
And the most famous legend, the critical historical marker, is the story of him secretly dropping bags of gold down a poor man's chimney.
Right, to provide dowries for his 3 daughters, saving them from destitution. And the gold famously landed in stockings that were hung by the fireplace to dry.
And that story, it established the critical lasting iconography, the connection between secret generosity, chimneys, and stockings.
His reputation spread rapidly after his death, and his feast day, December 6th, became a celebrated day across Europe for festivities and gift-giving.
But the Reformation in the 16th century had a profound impact on this tradition, didn't it? Especially in Northern Europe.
Oh, a huge impact. Protestants, who were eager to sideline Catholic saints, actively sought to replace Nicholas. In England, the gift-giver often became the less threatening, generally secular figure of Father Christmas.
And in other regions, they tried to replace him with the Christ child, the Christkindl.
They did, but the Dutch held firm. In the Netherlands, St. Nicholas became Sinterklaas, a tall Vin figure, still dressed in his bishop's vestments, so a red cope and a white mitre, riding a white horse and carrying a staff.
And it was the Dutch settlers who brought this version of the tradition with them across the Atlantic to New Amsterdam.
Which would, of course, eventually become New York.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the Anglicization process really began, and the saint truly became secularized.
Washington Irving popularized the term Santa Claus, a direct Anglicization of Sinterklaas, in his satirical 1809 History of New York.
And Irving described Nicholas as this jolly, pipe-smoking Dutch figure riding over rooftops. So he established the connection to flight and roof access, but without the specific bishop's attire.
And the modern iconic image solidified so rapidly in 19th century America through 2 key pieces of media that merged that Dutch tradition, the English Father Christmas, and this new American literary invention.
First, Clement Clarke Moore's 1822 poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas."
An absolute classic.
This poem single-handedly defined Santa's modern persona. He became a right jolly old elf, rotund with a white beard, traveling in a miniature sleigh pulled by 8 tiny reindeer, navigating chimneys and dispensing joy. He moved away entirely from the saintly bishop.
And then came the visuals that completed the look.
The cartoonist Thomas Nast, working for Harper's Weekly during the American Civil War in the 1860s, he further developed the iconography in these immensely popular drawings.
So he gave him the plump figure, the white fur crim, the red suit.
And crucially, he decided he lived at the North Pole. He was actually using him as a symbol of domestic unity for the Union side during the war.
Now, we absolutely need to address the persistent myth that Coca-Cola invented Santa's red suit in the 1930s.
Yes, let's debunk that right now.
Our research clearly shows this is demonstrably false. Nast had already depicted Santa in red suits with white fur trim since the 1860s, though the colors did sometimes vary, right? Green or blue sometimes appeared too.
They did, but the Coca-Cola connection is significant, not for invention, but for standardization and global popularity.
Okay.
When the company hired the artist Haddon Sundblom in the 1930s, they asked him to create a specific, consistent image for their widespread advertising campaigns.
And Sundblom's artwork defines Santa as warm, jovial, and consistently dressed in that specific shade of red and white.
And because these images were distributed globally across millions of magazines and billboards, Coca-Cola cemented this particular look as the universal standard. It made the connection between the color red and Santa nearly unbreakable, even though the concept predated their campaign by a good 70 years.
Let's delve into the surprising history that's embedded in our seemingly innocent Christmas decorations. Because when you look at the research, so many of the most familiar symbols, trees, wreaths, holly, mistletoe, they have these complex histories that interweave ancient pagan rituals with specific Christian theology. Often, it's the result of a compromise.
Let's take the Christmas tree again. The use of evergreens during the winter solstice stretches back thousands of years and across multiple cultures. Ancient Egyptians, for example, revered the date palm as a symbol for the triumph of life. The Chinese used evergreens to symbolize eternal life.
And for Northern European pagans, evergreens were these powerful symbols of life persisting through winter's death. Bringing them indoors was a tangible way to ward off evil spirits, ensure fertility, and encourage the return of spring.
But the specific tradition of a decorated indoor tree, that likely originated in 16th century Germany. The church's strategy here was often one of adaptation rather than destruction.
And that's beautifully illustrated by the legend of the English Benedictine monk Boniface.
It is. In the 8th century, Boniface traveled to German territories to convert pagan tribes. The legend says he cut down a sacred pagan oak tree dedicated to Thor, where sacrifices had been held.
And miraculously, a young fir tree sprang up from its roots,
Symbolizing new life in Christ. The fir, pointing toward heaven, was declared the tree of the Christ child.
So that narrative provided the theological justification for adopting the evergreen. It wasn't merely stolen, it was transformed.
Precisely. And Martin Luther is also famously credited with integrating the tree into domestic Christian practice in the 1500s. He allegedly saw starlight shining through the branches of a fir tree and was inspired to decorate a tree indoors with candles to represent the heavens and the light of Christ.
So the decorated tree really represents that perfect historical blend. Ancient pagan reverence for the persistent life of the evergreen, channeled through a specific German Christian innovation, and then finally popularized globally by Victorian royal influence.
Exactly. Now for the other green symbols. Holly, mistletoe, and wreaths. Both holly and mistletoe have profoundly deep pagan roots, far predating Christianity.
Druids, Celts, and Romans brought holly indoors because they believed its perennial green had magical powers and could assure spring's return. Its spiky leaves were believed to repel evil spirits and sometimes even protect homes from lightning.
And mistletoe was considered even more sacred. Druids harvested it from oak trees using golden sickles during their solstice ceremonies, believing it represented the tree's spiritual life force and possessed healing properties. These plants were vital protective elements during the darkest, most vulnerable period of the year.
So the early church, because of these strong and persistent pagan associations, initially tried to ban both plants completely.
They did. They encouraged the use of purely Christian symbols instead. But these customs proved far too popular among the common people to suppress entirely.
So the church had to absorb them and reinterpret them.
Exactly. Holly became explicitly associated with Jesus' suffering. The prickly leaves represented his crown of thorns, and the red berries represented his blood. It turned a protective pagan symbol into a deeply theological one.
And the kissing under the mistletoe, where does that come from?
That evolved from Norse legends about peace and reconciliation. Mistletoe was seen as a symbol of friendship and goodwill, and if enemies met under a sprig of it, they were obliged to lay down their arms. The kissing custom was an adaptation of that, a way to diffuse ancient religious associations with a new, more benign social tradition focused on temporary peace.
And finally, the wreath.
The circular shape represented eternity and continuity in ancient cultures all across the Mediterranean. Christians adopted it to symbolize eternal life through Christ, with the various evergreens acquiring specific symbolism: fir for hope, cedar for power.
So it shows that these ancient aesthetic principles, the circle, were maintained, but the underlying meaning was completely recontextualized for a Christian audience.
Hmm.
The 20th and 21st centuries have really defined the final iteration of Christmas, a truly global phenomenon characterized by intense, massive commercialization, widespread secular adoption, and remarkable cultural diversity.
And while Victorian Britain had certainly introduced commercial elements, the card, the crackers, the dedicated shopping, the scale just exploded in the 20th century, particularly in the United States.
Right after Christmas became a U.S. federal holiday in 1870, the economic dimensions grew exponentially.
By the late 1880s, you see the rise of department stores as the engines of the holiday economy. These stores created what we now recognize as Christmas destinations, using elaborate festive window displays, animated figures, and these carefully curated sensory experiences to attract and hold shoppers.
And Gordon Selfridge, the American retailing magnate who founded Selfridges in London, he's reputedly the man who invented that pervasive sense of commercial urgency.
He is. He's credited with coining the phrase, "only X days until Christmas," which turned the calendar countdown into this high-stakes consumer mandate.
The marketing became pervasive and all-encompassing. By the early 20th century, manufacturers of every conceivable product, from soap and mustard to cars and jewelry, were tying their advertising directly to Christmas gift-giving,
And the volume and the cost just escalated constantly.
which reached the incredible scale we see today. By 2019, data was showing Americans were spending approximately $1 trillion on the Christmas season.
$1 trillion. It's staggering.
It is, averaging nearly $1,000 per person solely on gifts. This is a staggering economic force built almost entirely on the idea of obligatory emotional exchange.
And this intense commercialization drew critics almost immediately. As early as 1904, the writer Margaret Dalen was lamenting the flippant degradation of Christmas.
She was questioning the transformation of gift-giving from genuine Dickensian generosity into an obligatory, often mercenary material exchange required by social convention.
And that tension between spiritual meaning, charitable intent, and the sheer volume of material consumption, it remains central to the modern holiday experience. Many people find that the obligation to buy gifts overshadows the genuine joy of connection.
Despite this internal tension, though, Christmas has evolved into a truly global phenomenon. It shows this remarkable adaptability that just effortlessly transcends religious borders.
Absolutely. Take Japan, for instance, where less than 1% of the population is Christian. Christmas is celebrated as a major secular event featuring Santa, lights, and consumerism, but with this bizarre, unique tradition: eating KFC for Christmas dinner.
That KFC tradition is the perfect illustration of modern commercial cultural adaptation. It shows how new traditions can be minted almost overnight.
It's the result of a wildly successful 1974 marketing campaign by KFC Japan. The slogan was "Kurisumasu ni wa Kentucky," which means Kentucky for Christmas.
And it just filled a vacuum for a high-status Western festive meal. It shows how commercial influences can create entirely new non-religious traditions in a completely different cultural context.
And you see similar secular adoption and diversity globally. In India, despite Christians comprising less than 3% of the population, Christmas is a national holiday. Even in Muslim-majority countries like Senegal, the day is widely observed due to historical influence and the holiday's universal appeal for celebration.
And the local traditions offer this wonderful contrasting richness against the Western homogenization. In Mexico, you have the tradition of Las Posadas.
Right, which reenacts Mary and Joseph's search for lodging over 9 nights. It involves these community processions and candlelight. It's beautiful.
Or consider Poland, where families keep a live carp in their bathtubs before dinner, and then they save the fish scales to carry in their wallets throughout the year for good luck.
It's fantastic. Or Iceland, where instead of a single Santa Claus, children are visited by 13 mischievous Yule lads who deliver gifts, or, if the children misbehave, rotten potatoes.
What this global spread really confirms is that while there is an undeniable influence of American popular culture, the red-suited Santa, the lights, the holiday ultimately adapts to local values and needs. The evolution of Christmas traditions is ongoing. It's constantly absorbing and transforming, which makes it arguably one of humanity's most enduring and culturally pliable festivals.
I think that's absolutely right.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for me. What emerges from this entire historical journey, from the social inversion of the raucous Saturnalia surviving the Puritan ban, to the tightly curated, highly commercialized global celebration we know today, is Christmas's extraordinary capacity to absorb influences, endure political suppression, and just fundamentally reinvent itself.
The history confirms that whether the focus of the celebration is profoundly sacred or entirely secular, the core human needs have endured and adapted to every generation. The need for light during the darkest season, the warmth of connection, the act of generosity, and the feeling of hope, these elements are constant across 2 millennia of chaos and change.
It is not a fixed historical artifact, it's a living tradition. It's a testament to humanity's need for a guaranteed time of celebration when the calendar reaches its bleakest point.
Which raises an important question for you, the listener, to explore as you encounter the traditions this season. Considering that the Puritans banned Christmas precisely because it lacked biblical justification and was so defined by human tradition and adaptation, does the holiday's true, enduring meaning lie entirely in its function, as a guaranteed, universally adaptable time for light, warmth, and community, rather than its original theological mandate?
Something to mull over as you hang your holly and mistletoe.